Mary's nephew, Mark Odell. And so he was 65. You said he worked at Prosperity Bank here in town. So folks here may know him, or you know the family. So please remember that family.
Carol Favor has gone to see family.
Okay, let's say it. Carol's not here, but she's visiting. And Peggy, you said your son, I overheard you said your son was in town for a few days and he's on his way. Very good. Off on the next trip. Back to China? Eventually.
He's going to Houston first
and then to China.
He's had a few miles under his
I bet. He said with all the miles and flying first class, it's not too bad. And so, well, does anyone have an update on Diane?
We have a folder going around about it.
June's got a picture from way back.
It was real young.
Yeah. I have not heard anything new or any other developments. Yeah.
I haven't visited in 2 or 3 days.
Okay, well, let's pray together and then we'll begin. Father, we're grateful for this day, for a few minutes to read and think and study. We're grateful for the good people of this congregation, our brothers and sisters whom we love. We pray for Mary's family and as they grieve, for the Weems as they're not with us today, also for Carol. We're grateful for a few moments today to study and to think. Please open our eyes and open our understanding as we read your word. And please be with the people that we love who are far from us or who need you in special ways. Please hear our prayer in Christ's name. Amen. Okay, well, this time we're in Exodus 18. Good morning if you're watching on the live stream, live. We're in Exodus 18, and we have been for several weeks, and will be for about 4 more weeks or so to the end of November. And then that gets us ready for Advent and Christmas, a short series. Next week, if you'd like to read ahead, go on into chapter 20 through 23 or so. Today we're in chapter 18. Yes?
Remind people that next Sunday is fall back.
Oh, yes. Change your clocks next week if they don't change by themselves. And change them back, not forward. Thank you. So yes, this time next week we get an extra hour, right? Is that right? Yes. So next week is November already, and we'll be in the 10 Commandments and others. The 10 words and some more instructions. So there's this block of laws beginning with the 10 words or the 10 Commandments in chapter 20. And it's about 4 chapters worth, 20, 21, 22, and 23. And then on we go from there. And the narrative picks up again, but we kind of pause with the narrative and stay with a chunk of law. There are other large blocks of law. We could go over to Leviticus, Numbers, and then a restatement in the whole book of Deuteronomy. But we get a block, and we will look at that block next time, Lord willing. Last week, we kind of looked at a series of incidents where God provided something. And in each of these incidents, there's a need there is God meets the need, the place where it happened, or something about the event or the incident has a name attached to it, a name meaning. And kind of taken as a whole, we learn that God is faithful to his promise to bring the people out. So we've left Egypt, we're out of Egypt. We have celebrated it in chapter 15 with a poem or hymn. And then in pretty rapid succession, our author gives us some incidents of distress or challenge. We don't have anything to drink. We don't have anything to eat. We meet an enemy or a hostile group. And God provides, God provides, God provides, God provides. And so that punctuates the last section. The end of 15, into 16 and 17. So it's kind of like a sandwich of sorts. We have water, food, water, and then the kind of a battle, a group of people that opposes Israel. We will today, chapter 18, kind of have, it's one, it concerns Jethro. So it's kind of one set of characters, in a sense, in two acts, if I could use that illustration. So the curtain will come up with a geographical shift. We're moving from place to place. And every time we move from place to place, we kind of signals a change in thought or a change in content. We're moving on in the story. For example, look at 17, verse 15, and 18, verse 1, where our chapter break happens. So there's this incident with Amalek. Our Pew Bible gives you a footnote that Amalek, the Amalekites, are descendants from Esau. And we've read the story of Genesis, presumably, enough to remember the story with Jacob and Esau. So it seems like right out of the gate, as we're kind of right out of Egypt, we find this old rivalry in new clothes. What goes back a generation continues on. And we have the incident, and then at the end, Moses builds an altar. He names it, "The Lord is my banner," which our Pew Bible gives us a footnote, 17:15, Yahweh Nissi, Nissi. Yahweh, or the Lord, and Nissi is banner. Okay? The Lord is my banner. So there's a place that has a name that has ongoing significance. Okay? My hand is lifted towards the Lord's throne. The Lord will be at war with Amalek from generation to generation. But today he has been my banner. We have survived. And the curtain kind of comes down. So this happens just like it has happened in the 2 or 3 preceding incidents. There's an incident, then there's a name, a statement of its significance, and then on we go. Okay, when we move on in chapter 18, we return to Moses' father-in-law, Jethro. Also, an outsider to the covenant, so to speak. He's from Midian. We just had an incident with Amalek. And really, in a sense, it seems like this kind of plays off a theme that we sang about in chapter 15, which is, when the peoples hear, this is 15 verse 14, part of that song, when the peoples, all these other peoples, when they hear what God has done for Israel, they will shudder. Anguish will seize the inhabitants of Philistia. The chiefs of Edom will be terrified. And we just kind of go down like we just look at the map. We say, and you, and you, and you, and you, and you all kind of quake in the face of what Yahweh has done. We have Moab, Canaan. The power of God's arm kind of freezes them in their tracks. Okay, you'll be still as a stone because of your powerful arm until your people pass by. You will bring them in and plant them. You've prepared the place for your dwelling. Lord, your hands have established your sanctuary. The Lord will reign forever and ever. We talked then, when we were in chapter 15, that one of the focal points, one of the facets of the covenant with Abram, all the way back at the beginning, was that Yahweh has a covenant with Abram to make him and his family into a great nation for the sake of all nations. We had a backdrop of Genesis 11, all of these people, kind of a global scope. And of all of those people, we focus in on one in Genesis 12, Abram. He promised to make him into a great nation for the sake of all nations. And here we have that same language of nations or peoples in 15:14. They're in awe of what Yahweh has done. Hopefully that draws them in, and hopefully Israel will draw them in and extend the covenant, in a sense, by bringing others into. When we get to the New Testament, we'll hear them called God-fearers. They're not ethnic Israelites. Ethnically, they're not from the tribe of Israel or Jacob or one of the 12. Ethnically, they're from another group. But spiritually, in terms of faith, they're God-fearers. They would be kind of like the peoples of the Old Testament or the nations of the Old Testament who see what Yahweh has done and then pledge their faithfulness and loyalty to him. So that's the thread that's run all through Genesis, now Exodus. We're going to pick it up here, okay? We don't know kind of the backstory of Jethro. We don't know, how does he get to be a priest of Midian? What does all of this mean? Okay, the narrator just kind of drops us back in with Jethro, priest of Midian. Here is one person who has heard, okay? The Amalekites evidently have heard, and they see Israel, and they see that old rivalry, and like, we know who you are, and they oppose Israel. Here we have a single person who has heard, who sees, and look what he does, okay? The first paragraph is verses 1 through 12. But look at verse 13. We have a time comment, the next day. So it looks like verses 1 through 12 happens on a day, and then 13 through the end of chapter 18 is the second day. Okay. Now skip to 18 verse 27. It's kind of a summary statement. Moses let his father-in-law go. He journeyed to his own land. Off we go. He kind of exits stage right or stage left. He kind of goes off stage. And the curtain goes down. And then the curtain comes back up. And 19:1 kind of resumes, kind of like in a fashion that we have seen earlier. In the third month from the very day the Israelites left the land of Egypt, they came to the Sinai wilderness. So we get a time marker that moves us forward, okay? We get a specific day, we get a month and a day and a new setting. So we've kind of shifted. So it looks like those geographical markers mark off chapter 18, and then there is a time marker, the middle of chapter 18, this day and then that day. Okay, so it looks like we've got two incidents on the same day, and they both concern father-in-law Jethro. Okay. Let's see the first part. So Jethro heard about everything that God had done for Moses and God's people when the Lord brought Israel out of Egypt. Now Jethro, Moses' father-in-law, had taken Zipporah, Moses' wife, after he had sent her back. Okay. Looks like she stays with Dad while Moses is off in Egypt. Looks like a reunion. Okay, along with the two sons. Now, again, our narrator is very concerned to give us name meanings here. So as we're reading, this is another incident of a name with just full of meaning. One of them is Gershom. If you're looking at our Pew Bible, we get a footnote. Gershom, the Hebrew sounds like a phrase, a stranger there. The word play, Gershom. Okay, we lose it in English because the English stranger sounds nothing like Gershom. English word stranger sounds like stranger. Okay? Well, there's a word play with the Hebrew name Gershom and being a stranger. Our Pew Bible says, I have been a resident alien in a foreign land.
The American Standard says sojourner.
A sojourner. Foreigner. Thank you. Okay. That's helpful. The other, Eliezer. Okay, our Pew Bible gives us a footnote. My God is help. Helper. The L of Eliezer, Eli, actually I guess it'd be Eli, we could say Eli. Eli, that is the God part of my God is a helper. My God is my helper. Eli. El, the word for God, or the term for God, Elohim. El. So when Jesus is on the cross and he cries out, Eli, Eli, my God, that's the same word here. So Eliezer is a compound word. Eli, God, or my God, and Atzar, the second part of the name, that's the help. Okay, to help is to Atzar, all right? Because he had said, the God of my father was my helper and rescued me from Pharaoh's sword. Okay, so we have two names and two explanations or significance. Okay, one, I was a foreigner and God has helped me. Okay. Still continues this theme of the foreigner or the one who is not an Israelite, still in view of the narrator as he's telling the story. Here it's Jethro, these boys' grandpa, Moses' father-in-law, Zipporah's father. He's not an Israelite. He's from Midian. Okay, priest of Midian. He sees, and he comes in with Zipporah and the boys have names, and the meaning of the name is, I was a foreigner and God has helped me. Okay? So, look at verse 5. So Moses' father-in-law, Jethro, along with Moses' wife and sons, came to him in the wilderness where he was camped. He sent word to Moses, I am coming to you. Okay. Goes out to meet him, kissed him, asked each other how they'd been. So there's a reunion. Moses recounted to his father-in-law all that the Lord had done to Pharaoh and the Egyptians for Israel's sake, all the hardships that confronted them on the way, and how the Lord rescued them. Okay, in other words, verse 8 kind of summarizes what we did the last 2 weeks in class in narrating the Exodus, the leaving, and then the celebrating of it, chapter 15. It all kind of encapsulates kind of in verse 8. Moses tells Jethro all that God has done and all the hardships and where we are. Okay, Jethro rejoiced over the good things the Lord has done for Israel. He has a statement, verse 10, "Blessed be the Lord," Jethro exclaimed, "who rescued you from the power of Egypt and from the power of Pharaoh. He has rescued the people under the power of Egypt. Now I know the Lord," and we know that's in all caps, Yahweh. "Now I know that Yahweh is greater than all gods, because he did wonders when the Egyptians acted arrogantly against Israel." End quote. Okay. So, on the lips of Jethro, a sojourner, a foreigner, a stranger, an alien, a Midianite, a non-Israelite, we get a great summary of what God, Yahweh, God of Israel, has done. We get a statement of recognition, praise, blessed be the Lord. And, the narrator says, look at verse 12, he brings a burnt offering and sacrifices to God. And Aaron comes. Again, we already know who Aaron is. I know that we have not really encountered him in this narrative yet, too much, a little bit. He's kind of helping Moses in Pharaoh's court. But we presumably, I think it's safe to say, we, the readers of Exodus, we already know Aaron's role in the priesthood. So here we have a sacrifice scene, and Aaron is present. We have a burnt offering and sacrifices to God, and Aaron is there, the elders of Israel, and we eat. We eat with Moses in God's presence. So the way our narrator kind of tells this story, pretty significant, that a foreigner has heard what Yahweh has done, brings sacrifice. And then the curtain comes down. So that's what happens on that day. That's all the narrator says. Now on the next day, we're going to get the next paragraph, chapter 18. Okay, what could we make of this? It looks like kind of the prototypical example of the way things ought to be when foreigners hear what Yahweh has done. They then sacrifice. Which, for the sake of the people who read Exodus, helps them understand what their role is within God's larger plan. That we, as Israel, enjoy covenant with Yahweh, and we are by nature, by intent, by design, intended to bring the covenant nature of our relationship with Yahweh out to the peoples and to declare what he has done. In this case, it goes just like it should. Moses tells what God has done, and this foreigner responds just like we would want anyone to respond. In some ways, he responds better than some Israelites will respond. Again, we've already read the story. We already know, the 40 years of grumbling and wandering. I think it's safe to assume we know that's going to happen. So very condensed story, in one little microcosm, we get kind of a beautiful example of how folks ought to respond to what Yahweh has done. And it's the most unlikely person we could think of. A priest from another people group. You would not expect a priest from another people group to declare Yahweh is greater than all gods and to give sacrifice or a burnt offering. That's the ideal response that we want Israel to have. to confess Yahweh is greater than all the gods. Look at what he has done, and we sacrifice. I think what that does is that for the sake of the readers of Exodus, who already kind of know all of where we've been, kind of puts us on notice. Where ought we to be? It also, for anyone who reads Exodus who's not ethnically Jewish, who does not come from the tribe of Israel or one of the 12, there is great hope for me. Yahweh, God of Israel, has acted for his people and invites me into. Very attractive in that sense, in the sense that God is drawing in all people. Now that thread's going to run all the way through. He rejoices, he blesses. Look at the verbs in verse 8. 9, 10, 11. He rejoiced, he blessed, he sacrificed. Just what we want to have happen. Okay. That is the groundwork for what comes next, which is about verse 13 through the end, which is a practical leadership question for disseminating the statutes and laws to the people. We've got Moses kind of as a single person, task or he faces almost an impossible job of adjudicating, I don't know what, difficult cases, whatever that means. How can we do this? Okay, Jethro comes in and gives advice and gives counsel, and things go well. Okay, so let's just kind of briefly note that. We don't need to read the whole thing, but just kind of note the highlights. And then I want to come back to this first part to make a point, all in 9 minutes. Okay? The next day. So the time marker kind of signals a slight shift, but we're not at a totally different place at a totally different time, which again, not to beat a dead horse, signals to me this is a variation on the same thing going on, okay? We'll move on literally in a minute, but before we do, on the next day, Moses sits down to judge the people. Your versions have judge. I think almost all of our English versions. Okay? Whatever this means, we're going to judge the people. Looks like we get a little bit of an indication. We're not totally in the dark. They stood around Moses from morning to evening. Moses' father-in-law sees. He says, "What are you doing? What is this thing you're doing? You're sitting alone as a judge while the people stand around you." Okay. Well, they come to me to inquire of God. Okay. So we have people seeking information or guidance, instruction. We have a question that's unanswered, a need of some kind. Okay. They have a dispute. Okay. That helps us understand what judging means. They have a dispute. And they come to me. And then I make a decision. Or in other words, I judge. I make a judgment between one and another. I teach them God's statutes and laws. Okay, now pause, and that's kind of the end quote. Okay, that's what I'm doing. Jethro says, "What are you doing?" He says, "Well, I judge them. They inquire of me. They're at an impasse. We are at odds. We have a dispute. We have it's an open question about what we need to do, how we resolve it, where do we go, what's the right thing to do, and I then give them statutes and laws and help them get things ironed out." Okay. Now, Jethro says, that's impossible that you can do this. Okay. Well, we'll get to that in a second. So there's some kind of teaching role here. And we may say, but there are no statutes yet. You're like, you're right, there's not. They're coming. Okay? It's coming. We saw this again earlier, back in, I'm going to lose my, well, we see it in verse 20. We see it again. Instruct them about the statutes and the laws. We saw this earlier, and I did not write the reference down. I wrote verse 20 down. It doesn't help, does it? When I raise the issue and then forget to put the statutes and ordinances. Look at chapter 15, verse 25. There's a statute and an ordinance, or a law. We haven't gotten to the giving of the law yet. We have a law before the law. Okay. How do you make sense of that? The way I make sense of it is, we reading Exodus, we already have the law. And now, in a sense, the author is taking us back and explaining the origins of things. How that works out chronologically, he makes a law and then he gives a law. It sounds maybe too simplistic to say, well, somehow he did it. That may sound like a cop-out, but somehow he does it. How do they keep up with it? I don't know. They kept up with it somehow. Okay. So what does it mean? What are the statutes and laws that Moses is giving? I assume in content, probably the same thing that we're going to find introduced in chapter 20. But they haven't received it. Like, I know they haven't received it. Well, how did they know it? Somehow Moses tells them. Jethro then says, it's impossible for you to do this. How can you possibly do this? You're going to wear yourself out. So there's a practical obstacle to one person doing this for everyone, and we need a structure in place to disseminate the judgment, to disseminate the adjudication. We'd say we need a judicial system rather than a judge, singular. Okay? Give them commanders. I don't know if your version may say commanders, like in verse 21. Commanders of thousands, hundreds, fifties, and tens. So we need a system. We need a network. It's not pyramid marketing, but, we need a pyramid. Okay? Then let them adjudicate and bring you the hard cases, whatever that means. How do you know what a hard case versus an easy case? Okay, we don't get that here. Where do you draw the line? Hard to know from here what qualifies as an easy case, what qualifies as something that needs to go up the chain, and eventually, kind of like Moses, he can't do everything, so he can do the most difficult ones. Okay? The major case versus the minor case, if you're looking at our Pew Bible in verse 22. Okay? If you do, it's Jethro here, if you do this and God directs you, you'll be able to endure, and the people will be able to go home satisfied. So we have a need that's not being met, kind of like because you're overwhelmed. Okay? Moses listened to his father-in-law, did everything he said. So he chose able men from all Israel, made them leaders over the people, thousands, hundreds, fifties, and tens. They judged the people. They bring the hard cases to Moses, and then on we go. Okay? And the curtain comes down. Well, what do we make of this? All right, here's some things I think we can make of this. In one case, the narrative moves us along. We've got the movement of the people out of Egypt, and we're coming out, and we're beginning to see the structure in place that can sustain the needs of the community. Okay, that I think is the first thing. We need to form a community. So I said, I'm looking at this little incident and step back and see the broad sweep. I see a whole group of people moving out, and as you move, we're getting crossways with each other, and the sense of community is threatened because we're ignorant, we need instruction, we are disputing with each other, and we need settlement. In other words, just people being people. Okay? We can't really have a cohesive group until we have some leadership structure in place. So that's the first thing I see, is in the narrative as Exodus moves us literally out of Egypt to fashion a people, we have a structure in place here to help in community formation. Keeping order so that the community can work the way we want and need it to work. In other words, we've got to have people who can help us settle our differences, because differences arise and eventually will threaten the community. We'll have disputes, okay? The alternative is chaos. We don't need this. We haven't gotten the law proper delivered yet, but we have a mechanism here that we can teach and mediate disputes, okay? What's fascinating is it comes from Jethro, the outsider, the Midianite priest, whatever that means, who looks like he renounces his Midianite priestness, all appearances suggest, and he recognizes Yahweh, God of Israel, has done a great thing. He acts as a priest for the people. He does a priestly thing, which is he offers sacrifice. In fact, and Aaron is there too. Our narrator kind of slides that across the table. Also, Aaron is there for this burnt offering. Okay, so at another level, what do we make of this? It looks like the first act of leadership and dispute resolution and community formation begins with Jethro's statement of praise and blessing. It begins with recognizing what Yahweh has done for his people, and that's the basis for the leadership. So as we take a further step back, as we're reading Exodus, whenever, again, I'm reading Exodus as one book in a multi-book, multi-volume shelf, goes all the way to 2 Kings. In other words, the end of Exodus is not the end of the story. It goes on into Kings. Where does it end? It ends with us in Babylon or afterwards, where we have seen all kind of the water under the bridge, and we have a new reality, which is we are not in our land. In fact, we've been taken out of our land. We were in it, and now we were out of it. Are we going to come back? What kind of people will we be as we go back? What kind of leadership will we have when we go back? What kind of community will we be when we go back? It looks like the narrator of Exodus is reaching back and helping us see, again, it's kind of on the lips of the most unlikeliest person, restatement of what God has done, blessing of God's name, a sacrifice to him, and the beginnings of leadership really are rooted in a recognition of what God has done. And then a structure that's designed to meet the needs of the people. You look like you were going to say something a second ago, and it may be that you've lost the train of thought because I kind of wanted to finish what I was going to say.
I'm sitting here thinking about Muhammad, who was a lawmaker somewhere, maybe in Egypt, when the
Yes.
children of Israel were in Egypt.
Yes, way back.
They were bound by some laws.
There were, yes.
So, I don't know, I've read, I think, that a lot of Commandment, well, the rationale for all of them is very similar to the law of Hammurabi. And I don't remember exactly when he was philosophizing
Sure, doing his deal.
laws.
If memory serves, I'll try to brush up my memory on this. So take my memory for what it's worth. I think he is about contemporary with Abraham in Assyria and Babylon, or Samaria, which is about where Abram comes from.
Syria's
And so,
way north. and
way north.
I was thinking Egypt.
Well,
That
if
at least that's where they had their system of whatever it was, morality.
Sure. If memory serves, it's a really fruitful angle to look at the law of Moses by looking at other legal codes from the ancient world. One of them is Hammurabi. One of them is the Egyptian law codes. And to kind of see the law of Moses in its context. For example, when we get to statements that sound really kind of specific about how you treat livestock, and what we would call, deep into the city code of Abilene about, the height of curbs and the distance of, how big a parking spot needs, that kind of thing. Like, you're kind of deep in the weeds. Like, well, that's kind of what law codes do. And there's other law codes that did those kinds of things. Can I push pause on that? Because we'll get to it next time when we actually look at some of the laws. So let's see where we are in chapter 19. We come to Sinai. Okay? And chapter 19 is only just a few verses. Then chapter 20 is the 10 Commandments. So we're at a great place to then begin to think about, all right, now we're going to form this community. What does that community look like? What ought it to look like? Well, the 10 words, the 10 Commandments, the law, give us that integrity of what the community ought to look like. We'll start there next week. Good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining in.